This podcast is lit.
If you have low test scores, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but my class ain't one. Hit me!
99 problems, but my class ain't one. If your test scores are low, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but my class ain't one.
Hello and welcome to Prospect's English Department's Poetry Podcast. This podcast is lit. Joining us this week are the usual suspects. We've got Mr. Ackroyd. Hello, sir.
Hello.
We've got Miss Ray. Hello.
Hello.
And we've got DJ Zoom. Hello, Mr. Zoom.
Hello.
This week we are focusing on Seamus Heaney's poem, Storm on the Island. And Mr. Ackroyd did a live lesson with everybody on Thursday. And we had, good participation again from Year 10 students. So I thought everyone seemed like they got involved really well again on the live lesson.
Yeah, no, I thought the engagement was really good with it. It's quite interesting doing Storm on the Island actually, because when I was preparing for it, I was annotating as I normally do, and I'd planned on the same amount of time that it took for the 3 poems so far. But actually, it took longer, didn't it? It was almost like an hour because there's a lot in it. I mean, it was almost as long as your What Fools Don't Know last week. Not quite there, but it was a long time. I had similar feelings as well. I was thinking, am I going to have time to have my lunch? That's what I thought last week, and that's what I thought this week. But
that's what you're always thinking, though, to be honest.
But what that actually shows is there's so much to unpick in it. It's highly metaphorical, isn't it? And there's so much to it. And I was quite pleased in the sense that it did go on for a long time, but there were still some students left at the end. Fortunately,
There were, bless them. We only lost a few as the hour tripped over. We lost a few students. We almost gained the judging panel from Guinness. I was tempted to give them a ring at one point. But no, absolutely. I think in some ways, to cover a poem like this in only an hour is tough. I mean, you can read this poem very simply. It's a storm on an island. It can take you 10 minutes to read it, and you can put it down, and that'd be the end of it. But you're absolutely right. And what your live lesson did was prove that actually there's a lot more to it than simply a little bit of wind on an island. Miss Ray, what do you think about this poem?
I'm sure there's a joke about hot air somewhere there, but I'm not going to do it. No, I really enjoy it because, I like to bring out my Irish heritage at any given moment. So obviously
I didn't know you were Irish, Miss Ray.
No, oh, shut up, Mr. Ackroyd.
You haven't mentioned that for about 5 minutes.
Are you sure? Shall I bring out my little... It's because I'm not wearing my Irish hat, my little Guinness hat. So I like to be able to talk to students about, obviously, the political background to that, because it's something that's incredibly geographically near to us, but actually lots of us don't really know very much about it. So I like the opportunity to be able to talk to students about that and educate them about our country, which is always really interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, well, should we get going then, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go. Let's give it a go. Come on, DJ Zoom. I hope you're ready to judge.
He's buzzing. Look at him.
You got your pen ready, DJ Zoom?
It was. Do you know what, guys? It's a shame this isn't a video podcast. I'd love the students to be able to see DJ Zoom's face right now. A kid on Christmas morning.
Can't wait to get stuck in.
Our poem in a headline.
Okay, well, let's go ladies first this week, shall we? Miss Ray, off you go.
My headline is Nature's Reign of Terror. So I've gone for a little bit of a pun in there this week.
And as ever, would you like to tell us why? Show us your workings.
So I think the poem on the first reading is very much about the power that nature has over the people on the island and the fear that brings. And also I've gone for the rain pun. It becomes slightly more complicated towards the end when we start to see that mood change from the confidence at the beginning towards what becomes terror at the end, where the islanders feel like they're not actually going to be able to defeat the storm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Going up second.
That's a good one. I was trying to think of puns and I couldn't think of any puns. So you've done really well there, Miss Ray.
I'm just funnier than you, Mr. Ackroyd.
Yeah, well, I definitely know that. But rain's such an obvious one as well, and I'm thinking now, why couldn't I think of rain?
I'm very simple, as we both know.
There's no Game of Thrones references this week, sir.
Not yet.
You haven't started yet. Give him time.
Yeah, but there's an obvious pun for this one. Storm is coming now. You're not gone for
that?
Yeah,
I thought that was too obvious.
Too obvious. Okay, well, next up. Poem in a headline. Mr. Ackroyd, off you go.
I've gone for eternal enemy at the edge of the world.
Wow. Hyperbolic or fair play? I don't know.
I think the poem is dramatic, and I've tried to replicate that with a dramatic, almost like film-like headline. The eternal sense that it's never ending, it keeps coming back, and it always turns into an enemy. And the edge of the world, obviously, that they feel like they're on the edge of the world, barren, inhospitable.
I like that.
Very good. I like it. Okay, well, my headline this week, poem in a headline, is we're going to try and teach some people some things, actually. I mean, one of the things we do at A-level when it comes to English is something called intertextuality. And it's where we might look at a quote or a word or a phrase which might appear in several different texts. So my headline is, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And that's something which an American president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, said in 1933. And it also appeared in To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my favourite novels. And I think it goes
Harry
quite
Potter,
well.
I think.
Is it in Harry Potter as well? There we go.
I think it's in Harry Potter as well, yeah.
It couldn't get more intertextual if I tried.
From Roosevelt to Harry Potter.
We do it all here at the
quite a
podcast.
historical journey. Need a TARDIS. One of the great things about this poem is the way that it ends for me in many ways, and it is that idea that actually fear is quite often irrational, but it can half be contagious. It can spread amongst people like wildfire. It can cripple, it can paralyze, it can stall us, it can prevent us from taking precautions and necessary action. And I think that the speaker in this poem, he was ready. It says at the start, I'm prepared. And look at him at the end, completely suffering and crippled by fear. And he realizes that actually, do you know what, that was quite irrational. So that was my headline. The only thing to fear is fear itself. DJ Zoom with the scores.
Oh, I'm slacking a bit here today.
It's a tough one, that, isn't it?
It is a tough one. That's a really tough one.
I don't think it's tough at all. I think DJ Zoom has got this down.
I think
flattery shouldn't work, DJ Zoom. Don't allow flattery to work.
Oh, it does. We both know it does.
So, I love the pun. 4 points on Miss Rain and a kind of reign over terror. Had one over Mr. Ackroyd there. 4 points.
I take it all back.
Eternal enemy on the edge. I like this one, the kind of end of the world idea, kind of very much the idea of how it's crazy, isn't it? How everything seems like it's going to end. 5 points and only fear itself. 5 points as well. I love the history in that. I didn't know about kind of how it could link. It's quite a nice idea and the intertextuality. So 5 points for you, Mr. Firkins.
What is the most important quote and why?
What is the most important quote and why? This section is where we try to pick just a single quote, one which we think really underpins the meaning of the poem, the one which we believe you should be revising, the one that we think you should be taking into the exams with you when it comes round to sitting your GCSEs next summer. Mr. Ackroyd, you first. Most important quote and why?
Yeah, I've gone for spit like a tame cat turned savage for a few reasons. First of all, it's the sound. I like the sound. It almost mirrors the speeding up of the storm, that increase in the storm, that double S, and that spit and savage really kind of feel like the weather's spitting at you. So I like that. I like the animal imagery behind it. And it gets to the very heart of the poem, I think, and this idea of taming and controlling, that human beings mistakenly, I think it was Connie, actually, one of our students, who said they mistakenly assume that they can tame nature, that they own nature, like we mistakenly assume that we own animals and pets. And when you see it turn, I think that tells you everything about that poem. For me, this is almost like the deep breath before the plunge. That kind of idea that something you think you were in control of, and then once it changes, all hell breaks loose. And it's almost like a metaphor for life as well, which I think is kind of long spells of monotony, punctuated by madness almost. Moving it back to coronavirus now, calm, then all of a sudden the world goes off. And I think it's got kind of a metaphor for life, not just the storm there in a headline. And I think the animal imagery just adds something to that, the sense that this storm's elemental, really fearsome and elemental, something that humans cannot comprehend.
Nice analysis, sir. Certainly given me food for thought. I'm going to try to keep a watch of you over the next few weeks and try and work out who the tame cat in your life is and who's spitting away at you. Okay, so most important quote and why for me is the last line of the poem. It says, "Strange is a huge nothing that we fear." And DJ Zoom, I think it's quite important that you pay special attention to this. I'm not going to use flattery like Miss Ray does. I'm just going to point at the actual phrase itself. It's a huge nothing that we fear. Everything that comes before it, the quote which Mr. Ackroyd's given you and the quote which Miss Ray will end up giving you later, it's nothing. It's a load of, it's just humdrum, it's noise.
So Heaney's poem's rubbish, is what you're saying?
Just quoting the last line. Huge nothing that we fear. And my interpretation is that really, if we are prepared, which the speaker was at the start of the poem, if you're prepared, then just with whatever it is, I find this poem quite metaphorical. Whether it be prepared. If you are prepared and you feel like you're ready, you take a deep breath, ignore distracting sounds around you. There's a lot of distractions in this poem, a lot of distracting noises, sounds, events, tame cats spitting. It's all a distraction. Focus on what you can do. The biggest enemy you have is yourself, your own thoughts, your own internal dialogues, your own anxieties. Carry out your plan as it was planned. You'll notice that at the end, there was nothing to worry about. And what you were worrying about, just like Mr. Ackroyd's quote, was a huge nothing. Miss Ray, the most important quote and why?
Follow that. I've gone for "space is a salvo." And I've gone for that because it literally just means that the wind is now battering the buildings. But in talking about this quote, I wanted to zoom into the idea of wind. Wind isn't actually anything. It's kind of just an empty space. And that almost makes that line and the whole poem a little bit of a paradox. The fact that the thing that these islanders most fear is nothing. And it's almost like that lack of a storm is a kind of bombardment. They are projecting their fears onto their imagination of the storm. They're working themselves up to it. They're imagining it to be bigger than it is. But it just reminds us, Heaney's just reminding us that the idea of nature is that powerful. It's not even nature that they're scared of. It is the idea of nature. That is how powerful nature is.
Nice. DJ Zoom with the scores.
Looking very nice today, DJ Zoom. Like your hair.
I say to myself, thank you very much, thank you.
I don't want to come across as two-faced, Mr. Zoom, DJ Zoom.
The students won't know, DJ Zoom, but your house was attacked by a swarm of bees yesterday.
It was, yeah, a huge nothing that we fear. Less than the end, yeah.
That was almost not a huge nothing.
It was almost like those bees turned savage, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was.
From nowhere. You didn't know it was coming, then all of a sudden, savage around.
Yeah, spitting like a
metaphor for life, really.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Okay, so the points are thus. You've all gone for really good quotes. Space is a salvo, like the idea that it's a paradox projecting their fears in it. It's the idea of nature that's scary. I think it very much incorporates all the main ideas of the kind of poem there. But for that, it's 5 points. A huge nothing that we fear, very short. I like how it's a kind of following on from the idea that Mr. Ackroyd's is the pointless quote. It's a huge nothing. The idea that is
I'd say Mr. Heaney, not Mr. Ackroyd.
Mr. Heaney. For me, it is the idea of focusing on yourself and how it's your own personal fears. And there's another 5 points for that. And the last one, Mr. Ackroyd spits like a tame cat. If you'd said it was a sibilance and used a bit of technical vocabulary, I would have given you full marks for that.
I think I do have written down sibilance, actually, but I just didn't say it.
You're going to have to deduct a point for that and give you 4 points.
Beautiful irony that Mr. Ackroyd's quote contained the word savage, and yet he was savagely marked by DJ Zoom. Love it.
I think it's because you two praised him.
Well,
He's obviously someone who likes praise, even if it's false praise. I can't do that. I can't do something falsely. Sorry.
Look, if you praise the man who's judging you, you get full marks. The proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
I think I got full marks so far. Firkin's on fire. Your defence is terrified. Right. Okay. So
We're definitely keeping that in.
okay. So
Structure.
so this is the bit of the podcast where we talk about structure. Mr. Ackroyd came up with that little jingle, by the way, although he's never sung it himself so far. Do you want to have a go, sir?
I can't sing.
You can't sing. You just
Let's
the thought.
talk about structure, baby.
I think
Yeah, you're
it is your
right. Even I
accent
can't
makes that.
complicate that. I can't compliment that.
It's the part of the podcast where we do talk about structure. We think it's very important that our students consider structure. And one of the things that really do need to be looked at in this particular poem is the fact that it's only a single verse. Guys, do you have any reasons why this is only a single verse?
I think I quite like how it looks on the page. So Seamus Heaney's talking about storm on an island, and if you look at the words on the page, it does almost look like an island. You get a clump of text surrounded by white paper. I don't think that's incidental.
No,
absolutely.
and I think it's the added onto that the idea of isolation.
Yeah.
That is isolated. It's alone. It is the rock, as you just mentioned, with everything else swirling around it.
And it does also, I mean, storms by their very nature are inconsistent. They sort of attack and then they maybe don't attack for a period of time. And again, when you look at the line lengths and things like that, they're inconsistent. We kind of get the idea of waves of attacks, and obviously even words like waves are used. And at the start, when he's prepared and mentally prepared, the punctuation is there, isn't there? There is no enjambment. There's full stops. Whereas when we start getting into the thrusts of the gales and the storms,
we start panicking a little bit.
We start panicking, and it's chaos, quite frankly.
And there is a mixture of enjambment and caesura because of that. It is all over the place, like the storm, chaotic. Caesura, sorry, if you want to be
correct.
The Greek pronunciation.
Enchantment as well.
Normally helpful to be correct. Normally,
we'll edit that out.
I don't think we will, Mr. Ackroyd.
I'm keeping that.
I'm from
Listen, DJ Zoom is the producer, and if you're not going to compliment him, then he won't be any mistakes.
I still refuse to compliment him. But I think as well the idea that is so skillful. If you look at the beginning, there's half rhyme in there, squat and slate, and at the very end he repeats it, air and fear. So there's assonance, and this just suggests that even though humans try to control nature, that they can never be in harmony with it. It's almost like that nature controls them. They can't quite capture it. And it's just a little bit of uncomfortable kind of rhyming that just proves that at the end. And I think Heaney's just, again, like last week's poem, the technical aspects of this poem are amazing, really.
Yeah. Those hard lines, they're really
that goes into it.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, Mr. Ackroyd, we don't score that round, but I think had we have done, I think that was a resounding victory on your behalf.
I'm here to try and get the students to learn something, Mr. Perkins, as well as make up the numbers, Ms. Ray.
So how interesting that I'm the only person now over the course of the 4 podcasts to not say that the scores aren't important.
What you fools don't know.
Time for our last segment of the show. What you two fools don't know. First up this week with what you two fools don't know, Miss Ray.
So what you two fools don't know is actually something that Mr. Ackroyd did allude to in his lesson on Thursday, but I don't think he quite developed it as much as I'm going to. That actually in the entire poem, there is absolutely no reference to time. There is absolutely no reference to place. For me, that makes it almost mythical. It gives it that kind of ethereal mood to it. We don't know where this is set. We don't know at what period of time this is set. It makes it any time, any place. So this poem is literally just about humans' fear of nature. Nature can destroy you at any point, in any time, at any place.
Beautiful. Next up, Mr. Ackroyd.
Yeah, it might go on for a bit. Anyway,
headphones out.
I just think that I'm going to be on the side of the angels on this one. In the last few lessons, we've been quite harsh on people and human beings, humanity in general. And I just wonder if we're doing humankind a disservice sometimes. The takeaway I take from this poem is not one of a political reading. It's not any other allegory. It's a championing of the human spirit. And I want to tell you why. For me, it's the cyclical nature of it. Yes, the storm comes or the war comes. And at the end, they are scared. They are fearing for their lives. But then when it finishes, they go back again and they build and they prepare. And then it comes again and they go back again and they keep going. It's the stoic nature of humanity. This is what Heaney's talking about here. Now, I'm a massive science fiction geek. And Mr. Firkins mentioned the TARDIS earlier. And I'm always a big believer, if someone's more eloquent than myself, which is most people, to be honest, to let them say it. So I'm going to quote Doctor who said it better than I could say it. And the Doctor is an alien, and he's talking about human beings.
You know
Homo
you're scraping
sapiens.
sorry. You know you're scraping the barrel when you're quoting an alien. Go on, carry on.
Maybe, but we're talking about human
That's
beings
racist.
here. Homo sapiens. What an inventive, invincible species. It's only a few million years since they crawled up out of the mud and learned to walk. Puny, defenseless bipeds. They've survived flood, famine, and plague. They've survived cosmic wars and holocausts. And now here they are, out among the stars, waiting to begin a new life, ready to outsit eternity. They're indomitable. And for me, this quote sums up what this poem's about. It's about the human spirit. So I've got no doubt that one day when this rock that we're on gets destroyed and the sun burns out, that we'll be faced as humankind with an existential crisis. And I've got no doubt we'll then go out to the stars to reference some of Heaney's ideas about space. And I've no doubt we will survive and endure, because that's what human beings do. We survive and we endure. And Heaney's said that.
Ah, okay.
I like that.
Nice. Good
Thoughtful.
ideas there, sir.
Yeah,
Wow, I mean-
well, it's my takeaway from it. I've not come across it as a reading, but I think this is the thing for students. I think there are intentions behind what Heaney's done, and we've talked about them, but we've got to take our own experiences into the poems as well and take things away with it. We can't just rely on the poet's thoughts. Once the poet has written this poem, it's ours, basically.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think personal response is incredibly important.
Right. Okay. Well, what you two fools don't know, although you just said it, is that I can't believe it. I'd almost got through this whole podcast without anybody saying this, and I was going to look very profound. What you two nincompoops, imbecilic, half-wit, cretinous, ignoramuses, harlequins, morons,
Sir,
simpletons.
come on. At least last week when I went on one, at least I kind of prepared and I went through a thesaurus all night and I made it a literature. You could have at least done that in your insult, surely.
Oh.
What you Merry Andrews don't know is that there is no way, and we always try and say this to students, and to be honest, there is no correct way. Not if you're a proper literature student. There is no correct way of interpreting a poem. And I think this poem, out of all the poems we've studied thus far, is a perfect example of it. I mean, you can try and box this poem if you want, put it into a box. You can try and point out the semantic field of, war. You can look at words like blast and pummel and bombarded and exploding. You can try to box it about it being about the power of nature and the fact that you cannot submit to nature. And actually, I wanted to add a little bit to what Miss Ray was saying earlier. I think what's particularly intimidating about the storm in this poem and about what Heaney's saying about nature is that when you're having a war with a human, you can tap out. You can raise a white flag. You can shout, "I submit." You can hold your hands above your head. But nature doesn't understand those things. So it's incredibly powerful and actually downright scary. But it could also be about a romantic couple, this poem. If you can read it that way. It could be about somebody fighting their inner demons and suffering from anxiety. It could be somebody suffering from other mental health issues. I mean, this poem literally could be about almost anything. And it's down to you as a reader to have your own personal relationship with a poem. By all means, do listen to other people's point of view. You should do that. But don't let others tell you what a poem is about. Sometimes people feel a bit uncomfortable by hearing this idea that you need to have a relationship with a poem. But a poem and reading a poem is an intimate experience. It's just you and the poem. It's about your relationship. It's about how you read that poem, and it's about what you make of the poem. And I think that this poem is a prime example of that.
And I think your reading of poems can change. I think your example there is really important. If you are going through a particularly tough time with your mental health, you may read a poem in a certain way that lends itself to that reading.
And I thought that was
Go.
No, go on, miss. Sorry, go on.
No, and then I was just going to say, if you're having one of those situations where you are having a bit of a rocky moment in your relationship and you read this poem again, it might then have more meaning in terms of that respect. So I don't think that once you have a meaning, that meaning is then created permanently. I think that meaning is quite fluid and dynamic and will change over time.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be taken in by people neither. So I think someone mentioned, I think a student mentioned the other day, this could be a metaphor for mental health when we opened it up to the students. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really good. But I have read other readings by so-called intelligent people who say this poem is about this. And I think, no, I don't agree with that. And that's an important point for students as well. Just because a teacher has said it, or someone who they might perceive to be academic or intelligent, doesn't mean to say it's right. And it's okay to disagree. And I think that's good. There can be several different readings, and I may agree with some and completely disagree with others.
I think some students might actually be liberated from the idea that there isn't a right or wrong answer in English. I dare say there'll be some students that might find it slightly scary and intimidating. There's no way of getting it right per se. But no, I think it's about embracing that, and I think this is a really good poem for that. Thank you, guys. Right, DJ Zoom with the scores.
Okay, so I think there's a clear winner in that last discussion where Mr. Perkins very much kind of hit that key point, isn't it? That we do need to be open to interpretation, and everybody should have their own personal viewpoint on what's being said. So for that one, is the top marks 10 out of 10.
You got full marks on this podcast.
Got full marks, full marks.
I think we need to find a reason to deduct some points from Mr. Perkins, otherwise it's going to be unbearable for the next 2 weeks.
Miss Ray, your one. Actually, I didn't think of it.
Points don't matter, Mr. Dew. I don't care.
Sorry.
we want to know what's happening with Mr. Perkins and Mr. Dew. I think there's some money being exchanged somewhere here. As well, after last week,
were those bees a warning?
After Mr. Perkins went on for about 15 minutes last week. And
we had the studio audience the week before as well, didn't we? The studio audience for helping me out.
I thought I had the market on waffling as well, but obviously not.
Accusations. That deducts points. 7 points, Mr. Ackroyd.
I don't care. I'll take them all off.
Well done, DJ.
I'm donating my points to Mr. Ackroyd this week.
Thanks, Miss Ray.
I'm interested
what do you
to
think?
see
What do you think of that then, Mr. Dew? I tell you what, Mr. Dew. Why don't you and Mr. Perkins just play? Miss Ray, we'll go home.
Yeah, Mr. Ackroyd and I will have. We're already at home. Mr. Ackroyd and I will have our own podcast.
Miss Ray's score was a 9. It's one of those that I didn't actually think about before. It's definitely something you should consider in your interpretations as well.
Brilliant. So what are our overall scores then? So I believe it's out of 20, is that right?
Yep. So in last place with 16 points is Mr. Ackroyd.
Is that including the 9 docked?
No.
Because then that means I'd have more than full points. Can you say you took 9 points off me?
No.
So that means I had 25 points.
I've been nice to you.
That gets you nowhere, Mr. Dew.
In second place with 18 points, Miss Ray, and a runaway winner, full marks, Mr. Perkins with 20.
I want to say well done, but I think that's a little bit of a stitch up, don't you?
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on there. I wonder what the listeners think of this as well.
Yeah, I'd like some feedback.
Kids are quite quick to the injustices of the world. Yeah. And I think they'll pick up on this, Miss Ray.
I agree,
no doubt about it whatsoever.
Well,
2 days in a row I've come second. I'm not happy.
Well, guys, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to win batters.
Do you not realise how long it took me to write down that Doctor Who quote? actually wrote it down. About 10 minutes. Not doing that again.
Watched all of the episodes.
Yeah, I think I pointed out at the time. Really, I think if you're quoting an alien, you're struggling.
Honestly, I think you're a dangerous territory. I think that's verging on racism.
It was a human being that played him.
Okay, well, on that bombshell, I would like to say a big thank you to the three of you. Thank you for your efforts today.
You're welcome.
And wishing everybody at Prospect School a lovely half term. Make sure that you rest up. We look forward to seeing you again after the half term, where once again we'll be having Miss Stratcoy's wonderful live lessons, and we will be recording another one of these podcasts. In the meantime, please do follow us. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. We're going to try and come up with some funky hashtags, and make sure you listen to any other of the podcasts that you haven't so far listened to. There are 4 now, so if this is your first one, then make sure you go back and listen to the others too. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.